With many states still enforcing stay-at-home orders, which of course limit travel, oil prices have been very low. That, of course, has a lot of people in the world of finance and commodity trading quite unhappy, and has led to, of course, to begin calling for the reopening of the economy in order to help boost travel. Now, Jonathan Larson of T1T Investigates talked about this, and they reported that an executive with one of Wall Street's biggest investment banks during an April 22nd conference call said the cure for these low prices was to begin to reopen the economy in order to increase consumption. But the issue with that, of course, is how do you do so safely without massive testing? Those considerations were barely addressed in this call. The April 22nd call, hosted by Morgan Stanley, featured a panel of 5 top officials from the law firm Akin Gump, including former Senator Joe Donnelly, very corrupt former congressman, and former Representative Lamar Smith, and 2 former Republican Hill staffers. So all of these people, of course, have connections within Congress that they will then use to lobby for the reopening of states, or, even more insidious, a federal bailout of oil companies. Akin Gump is an incredibly influential lobbying shop that represents many in the oil industry. Smith, who had used to sit on the House Energy Committee, had raised the prospect of reopening during the call, which was focused on potential federal aid for the oil industry. Now, a lobbyist for Akin Gump, Smith said, quote, "We have to increase the demand, and that means get the economy back on its feet." Here's a further quote from him. The problem that we have, the crisis isn't just one of overproduction. It's one of underdemand. And we're never going to really solve the crisis, any form of the crisis, I don't think, until we both reduce the impact it's going to have on healthcare and the economy both. We have to increase the demand, and that means get the economy back on its feet. We have to look out for the energy industry, which is so essential to our national security and so essential to our economic well-being. Now understand, this is a discussion about lobbying members of Congress, specifically Democrats, as Republicans are normally on board, right, in order to get them to put a fossil fuel bailout inside of the next bailout package. Now, the CARES Act did not give any money towards the fossil fuel industry. And of course, these lobbyists are looking to undermine that in order to put it in. Now, the optics of such a bailout, of course, would be incredibly disastrous, as most of the bailouts already have not gone to the people. There was at one time $1,200 check for some Americans and increased unemployment benefits, but mostly these bailout packages have gone massively towards corporations, and large ones at that. And so now, that said, that's why they are talking about reopening the economy instead of just focusing on the bailout. Now, in fact, during the call, Morgan Stanley Executive Director Devin McDermott did say, "We definitely agree with Smith's point about increasing demand by reopening the economy. Problem is, what's the timetable look like?" He's on board with opening the economy. They both are. But without adequate testing, we don't have a really have a timetable in which to be able to do so safely. That is a bit of a problem. Now, here's the thing. Now, I had talked about this when we had basically a crash in the price of oil. Perhaps now would be a good time when consumption is so low, as well as prices, to perhaps look for alternatives, invest alternatives. I mean, if you want to bail out the oil industry, why not, instead of using that money to bail them out, which are, of course, these companies are the most profitable corporations on the planet, instead, perhaps we should shift that money towards renewable energy, which might also need a bailout as well, as there's less spending, less people installing solar panels and the like, with, of course, people not buying a lot of things right now. I mean, this would be a great time to look into these alternative fuels. Instead, they're not going in that direction. Now, I want to give you a quote here from University of Maryland Carey School of Law professor Michael Greenberger, who was former head of trading and markets at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. He told TYT, quote, "The real fear here is not that the demand is being reduced, but that the reliance on oil is being reduced by forcing the public to go to forms of alternative energy." He added, "These guys are sitting in a room fighting what history is presenting, that the demand for oil, even if we open up the country, is going down. And in this particular case, people are dying." Now, Larson, in his piece, also notes that Morgan Stanley is invested in an entire portfolio of oil industry companies, and in March was estimated to be carrying more than $3 billion in outstanding debt from oil and gas loans. Aiken Gump counts oil interests, including ExxonMobil and Chevron, as clients, billing each $50,000 in the first quarter of this year. So there are definite money concerns. They desperately want the prices of oil to go back up and for people to consume more so they can continue to make more profits. That's what this is about. It's not about the health of the economy, and it certainly isn't about national security. Of course, that is the argument they will use to try to reopen the economy. It's about national security. It's about national security. That's why we should also get the Trump administration to try to buy more oil for the strategic reserve. Yes, we're just looking out for the national security of this country. If you were really concerned about that, then why would you focus your entire energy policy on being able to buy oil from the world market, which comes from all over, every place in the world? Why not, if you were really worried about this, focus on creating energy at home using solar, wind, geothermal, and other forms of energy that don't require exploiting resources of another country? That would actually make far more sense than doing what we're doing now, but it also doesn't make them any sense, if you get my drift. Now, one more thing. There was a mention of aggressive testing, but unfortunately, there was only one mention of this. The focus of this call was meant on reopening or getting a bailout. It is very possible that they will get both, as many states are moving to reopen their economies, even though the experts say it is not quite time to do so. Congress is already deliberating a Phase 4 package. With how much money the fossil fuel industry pumps into Congress at this point, a bailout is certainly possible, if not likely, which of course would be incredibly unpopular among the people if the people were also not given a bailout. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.